Well, hello. Always good to hang out with you. I want to say hello to our campuses. So if you're watching in Kenosha or you're watching in Racine or maybe you're halfway around the world watching online, we want to say hello to you. And of course, we always say hello to our Weekends on Wednesday service. The energy is always there. Always love hanging out with this crew of people. We're going to start with something I have been talking about the last couple weeks. And so I just have to remind you again, if you've not gotten your free tickets yet for our 10th anniversary, ladies and gentlemen, we are 7 weeks away. GreatLakesChurch.com/10 years. It will give you all the details of what's happening at this particular event. It's Sunday, September 29th. We're canceling Sunday morning services. We're canceling the Wednesday prior to this particular Sunday. And it is going to be the biggest thing we do all year, maybe the biggest thing we've done in our history. But the reason I bring this up, I had no intentions of doing this. I went to a Kingfish game this week, ran into someone who's been around for a while. I said, hey, did you get your 10th anniversary tickets yet? And they said, no, but I've been around for a long time. I am a volunteer. I know you'll save me a seat. And I said, it don't work that way. I'm not saving my wife a seat. So she better get a ticket, all right? And so this is how we know who's showing up, and it helps us plan. So I'm asking you, if you've not yet done that, to do that. By the way, over half the tickets are already gone in just 2 weeks, okay? So if you haven't gotten them, now is the time. Now, today, we are continuing this series that we've been in all summer long called Unstuck. And the key verse for this series, if you're just kind of catching up, is that anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone, a new life has begun. If you have surrendered your life to Jesus, if you've embraced the Jesus way, God has given you a new identity. Okay, so whether you see it or not, whether you feel it or not, whether you even believe it or not, since you decided to follow Jesus, He has been at work in your life, changing you. He's using people, He's using circumstances, He's using good things and bad things. He's using everything in your life to change you into the person He has designed for you to be, which ought to be great news. But for so many of us, it's frustrating news because we're thinking, man, if I ought to be a changed person, I don't feel changed. What I do is I feel stuck, right? I feel stuck in my thinking. I feel stuck in my beliefs, I feel stuck in my faith, I feel stuck in comfort, I feel stuck in a cycle of bad decisions and different habits. I just feel stuck. Well, that's why we're doing the series, right? The series is called Unstuck because I want you to know it is absolutely possible to change. It's possible to find freedom in your thinking. It's possible to find freedom from prejudice. It's possible to find freedom from the cycle of bad decisions and from the habits in your life. And it is absolutely possible to find freedom from the pain and hurts we tend to pick up in this life. And that specifically is what we're going to talk about today. I want to talk about how to get unstuck from the pain and the hurts in our life. Now, you know this. When we talk about pain, we talk about hurt. There are different levels. Right, so when you're a kid and you show up to the doctor, what do? They give you a pain chart. And you have to tell them, hey, this is where I land. And so I just want you to know, as we talk about pain and hurt today, we are going to talk about the pain that's discomforting, distressing, or intense. We're not going to get into the utterly horrible or unimaginable and unspeakable type of pain. And that's just because that doesn't occur in our life on a regular basis. It occurs in our life, and we all have pain of rejection, a deep pain of hurt that we've gone through, but most of us on a weekly or monthly basis are not going to go through that deep type of pain, but we are going to go through discomforting, distressing, and intense pain. So that's where I want to focus in on today. Now, I think you already know this, but we are the most sensitive, thin-skinned, easily offended society in the history of the world. And that's why it's so easy to have a lot of emotional pain and emotional hurt and be wounded by something somebody said and be offended multiple times, throughout the year. We are thin-skinned and easily offended. And it seems like everybody is offended by something. But of course, what we're offended by is different for everybody. In fact, I'm just going to give you an example of different things that people have been offended by over the past few years. And I'll just say this. I'm not making any statements. I'm not saying I agree or disagree. I mean, some of these are offensive, some not so much, right, in my own heart. But I just want to show you some examples. And again, not making any big statements. So a couple years ago, TV Land decided to pull the 1980 reruns of Dukes of Hazzard from showing because of the controversy associated with the Confederate flag. All right, and so there are people getting offended, and this has happened with monuments and with statues and memorials. Understandable. Right, and then the Syracuse University, they decided to pull the kiss cam a few years ago because there were some students who said they felt pressured when the camera was on them. They felt pressured to kiss. At one point, there was controversy and people getting offended over my cleaning trolley because this is a toy that really fuels gender stereotypes. It's being marketed to young girls. Then there's a university student in England. They banned a local Mexican restaurant from handing out sombreros as part of their promotion because it fueled racial stereotypes. A veterans memorial in Missouri stood for 22 years. It had to be moved because of a Jesus fish on it, and that became offensive to individuals. Target, you might remember this, they went through some controversy because they were selling a T-shirt for ladies that said trophy on it, basically trophy wife, and that was demeaning towards women. There was a church in Michigan. They posted this on their sign, a message for dyslexic atheists. There is a dog. That's actually kind of funny, right? But they received negative feedback because they were being lighthearted about disability. So we live in an era of offense, whether it's politics or religion or gender pronouns. And I'll say this, there are some things we absolutely do need to be offended by. In fact, the emotion we feel towards something, I don't care what it is, how ridiculous it may be to someone, the emotions we feel, that's actually a good thing. Because those emotions tell us what is important to us, and we don't want to go through life being indifferent. But I think we can all agree, things have gotten a little out of control. Okay, victimhood has gone viral. And so being offended is no longer seen as a weakness in someone's character, but pretty much their constitutional right. Okay, so you've got the right to be offended. Matter of fact, if you don't get offended over something that I think you should be offended by, I'm offended that you're not offended because you should not be indifferent. Everybody's offended. Men are offended, women are offended. Husbands are offended, wives are offended, kids are offended, millennials are offended, baby boomers are offended. Atheists are offended. Religious people are offended. Vegetarians are offended. Vegans are offended. In fact, there's a group of vegans who recently called for the removal of meat-based metaphors. Okay, so they want a ban on phrases and idioms that seem to encourage animal cruelty. So I'm just going to give you some examples. Instead of saying kill two birds with one stone, they want us to say feed two birds with one scone. Instead of be the guinea pig, be the test tube. Instead of beat a dead horse, feed a fed horse. Instead of bring home the bacon, bring home the bagels. Instead of take the bull by the horns, take the flower by the thorns. Okay? So this may seem ridiculous to some of you, but it's absolutely serious to others. And PETA was being lighthearted, of course, in the phrases they came up with. But there are people who are absolutely diehard about this. There are animal rights activists who have been arrested because they've shown up to steakhouses and they've created chaos by yelling at customers or in some cases actually playing through speakers the sounds of animals being slaughtered. Okay, so people have literally gone to jail over this kind of stuff. And it may seem ridiculous to you, but it's absolutely serious to them. This is how an offense works. What seems like no big deal to one person is a really big deal to another person. And we all experience this. I don't care who you are, and I don't care how spiritual you are and how much you love God. You may have flown here today on angel's wings, like my wife. You may eat food only in the shape of crosses. You may pray the Lord's Prayer 5 times a day. But I can tell you this about you. You have some button in your life that if the wrong person on the wrong day said or did something you didn't like, you would find yourself sitting in a jail cell right next to the animal rights activists. We all have things in our life. In fact, does anybody remember the game Operation? Okay, this is before Fortnite, right? And so Operation, there are these little gaps in this guy's body, and you have to do an operation. So you, of course, have to take these tweezers, and you have to get whatever tool or object was inside of that gap. But, of course, what happens when you hit the metal? You remember that? It buzzes, right? The nose lights up. It gets a little uncomfortable here. Now, this is you, and this is me. We all have offenses. And if the right person hits us in the wrong way, it will set you off. So let me say this. Offenses are inevitable. Offenses are inevitable. Somebody's going to send you a text message or an email that's going to come across very hurtful. Your spouse is going to get on your last nerve. Someone's going to see you, and they are purposely going to ignore you. Someone's going to show up to an important event in your life, but they're going to show up really late. I guarantee you offenses will come your way. But offenses and being offended are two very separate and distinct things. Offenses are inevitable, but being offended is optional. An offense is what happened. Being offended is a reaction. An offense is what was said or done. Being offended is choosing to hold on to what was said or done. An offense is an event. It happens usually in a moment. Being offended is this ongoing decision. So offenses are inevitable. They're going to happen. Being offended is optional. I love what King Solomon of Israel writes. He says, sensible people control their temper. They earn respect by overlooking wrongs. Translation. People who have thick skin, people who can just kind of brush it off and let it go and not let things get to them, they are respected by others. So what would your life look like if you just chose to be a person who is hard to offend? Right? Well, what would our church look like if the vast majority of people who attended our church, whether it was on social media or their interactions with people or their interactions at work with individuals or even in their family, just chose, I'm going to be someone who is not easy to offend? In fact, let me ask this question. What is your current level of offendability? And for you grammar people, I know offendability is not a word. But what does it take for you to be offended? A few years ago, I read a book that kind of rocked my world, and I think it was just the season of life I was in. It was called The Pain of Leadership. And the summary of the book is that our capacity for pain determines our capacity to lead. Our capacity to disappoint people, our capacity to have difficult conversations, our capacity to be misunderstood, our capacity to have people disagree with us, our capacity for pain determines our capacity to lead. Put another way, you'll never be able to handle big things if small things hold you back. You'll never be able to handle big things if small things hold you back. But the tension I have, even in saying this, is nothing ever feels small. Right? When someone disagrees with me, when someone doesn't acknowledge me, when they make an offhanded comment, when someone doesn't invite me and they invite a whole lot of other people, it feels like a personal attack. And so offenses are inevitable because life is lived in the context of relationships. Nobody gets offended in isolation. Right? It takes a little bit of a relationship to really get offended. And the higher the level of relationship, the more close you are with someone, the bigger the offense can become. Now, that is the setup for today's talk. I'm going to spend the rest of the time we have today looking at a story that was written down in the first century by one of the disciples of Jesus. His name was Matthew. And I'm going to let you know right up front, this is an uncomfortable story. In fact, in my opinion, it is the most challenging and difficult story we have looked at all year long. Okay, so there's a lot of tension in this story, and what I'm hoping, and the reason I'm telling you this is I don't want any of us to get derailed by things that maybe we don't understand because we didn't live in the first century and then miss the point of the story. The fact is, first century Jewish culture operated very different than how we operate today, okay? So there might be a little bit of disconnect, but it starts out with a Canaanite woman. Okay, so to say a Canaanite woman is like saying a Hispanic woman, or they're from Canada, Canadian woman, right? An American woman. It's just kind of telling us her background, where she is from. And the very fact that the author writes about a Canaanite woman automatically puts tension and drama into the story. Because Canaanites were non-Jews. And the Jewish people, the Israelites, they thought of non-Jews, they thought of people like the Canaanites as unclean. In fact, they actually would refer to them in their culture as dogs. It was ethnic bigotry at its worst. Okay? But this Canaanite woman, she gets on her horse and she takes her horse to an old town road and she approaches Jesus. Let me ask you this. What in the world would cause or make a Canaanite woman roll up on a Jewish Jesus hanging out with his Jewish homeboys? Why would she enter this kind of situation that could easily be filled with tension and racism? Why would she enter this kind of setting? Well, the answer is because her daughter was having serious issues and needed a healing. Okay, so if you're a parent, you should understand this. You'll do anything for your kid when they are sick or in trouble. Am I right? Of course I'm right. A couple weeks ago, my son Jaden, who's 13 years old, he was on a mission trip with our middle school kids to Indianapolis, ends up with a double ear infection a couple days in, ends up having to go to the hospital, and we knew it was going to be a few days before he was going to be able to enjoy the trip, and so my wife gets in a car, she drives 4 hours one way to Indianapolis, she picks up her sick boy who's not feeling well and brings him back, rightfully so. That's what a mama does for her kid when her kid's sick. Parents, come on. This is what you do, right? If someone bullies your kid, you don't sit your kid down and say, hey, what I want to do is I want to quote Martin Luther King Jr. peace things to you. Here, let me, no. If someone bullies your kid, you rip off your cross necklace, you take off your I Love Jesus t-shirt, and you go to the school, and you want to track down these kids because you are going to talk to them. Nobody's going to bully your kid. If a teacher doesn't give your kid an A, oh, come on, it is on. I don't know what's wrong with your teaching, but I know my kid, I have been with my kid ever since my kid was born. My kid is brilliant. My kid is a genius. My kid is unique. And so something is wrong with your teaching. The reason he's falling asleep in class, that's because you're boring. The reason he's falling asleep, he's so advanced compared to the other kids, right? We get fired up when it's our kids. And so this Canaanite woman has a child who needs help. She walks into this area where Jesus is, and she doesn't care that the disciples are rolling their eyes. And she doesn't mind that someone kind of body checked her on her way in, right? Because her daughter needs a healing. She's brought her daughter to counseling. She's gotten her daughter medication. She's worked with her daughter day in and day out trying to get her help that she needs. She's having her eat a certain way. She's trying to get her to exercise. I mean, she's doing everything she knows how to do, and it is not working. But she has heard that this guy by the name of Jesus has the ability to heal people. So she makes her way in, and she says, have mercy on me, O Lord. Have mercy on me, O Lord. Now she knows, because of how difficult it was to get in to see Jesus, she knows she may only have a brief moment with him. So she doesn't waste any time. And she gets right to the point and she says, Jesus, I have a daughter who is sick, who needs your attention, who needs healing. And Jesus takes out his cell phone and he checks his Facebook posts. He reads a little bit through his text messages. And you think I'm making this up. Here's what we read. But Jesus gave her no reply, not even a word. Here's a desperate woman. She walks into one of the most uncomfortable environments she could have walked into. She needed help, and Jesus ignores her. One of the most common offenses that occurs in our life and in our relationships is the offense of being ignored. And we've all experienced this. Someone throws a party and we're not invited. Or we throw a party and someone we really want to be there doesn't even respond. We post something really important to us on social media and very few people even pay attention to it. We try to engage in conversation and it seems like nobody really wants to talk with us. We come up with a brilliant idea and it starts to get traction, but nobody gives us the credit. All of us have felt ignored by people in life. And I'm guessing most of us have felt ignored by God in life because we prayed for something and God didn't give us a clear yes or a clear no. There's just nothing. It's as if God just completely doesn't care. Being ignored is one of the most challenging things to deal with. It is an offense. In fact, I think it's absolutely more, I think being ignored is absolutely worse than being rejected because at least when you're rejected, you know where you stand with the person. But when I send you a text message and you don't even respond, you say nothing at all, but you're one of these crazy people who I know got the message because somewhere on the bottom of the message it says, read. It's not fun being ignored. So when you ignore me and you don't say anything, when you don't acknowledge our friendship, when you don't acknowledge the years of serving or the years of helping, let me just put it in the context, for me personally, the context of being a pastor, all right? Because this happens a couple times throughout the year, and it has happened every year since we launched. People that I love, people that I was there for them in the highest moments of their life, celebrated birthdays with them, were there for weddings, we're there for anniversaries. I mean, man, I had people over to my house. We had good times together. And then other people, it was in the low moments of their life, through losses, through funerals, through difficult and challenging times of their marriage, difficult times in their parenting. I mean, I'm convinced we are friends. I'm convinced they love me. I'm convinced they have a poster of me hanging in their living room somewhere. And then I find out through the grapevine, oh, they no longer attend. They're no longer part of the Great Lakes Church family. Or they tell me directly, just kind of feeling like I wish I could say I am so mature and so secure in myself that I'm like, what's up? It's time, move on, okay. But I get obsessed. I lose sleep. I think, what did I do wrong? Because I was there when they needed a phone call. Right? They had my number. I was there when they needed someone to talk to. I opened up my house. I was there for them in the good times and the bad. Okay, let's just be fair. This is not so much a talk today as it is therapy. But this is what we deal with. The offense of being ignored is a big deal. And part of it is we live in a culture where everybody has this insatiable need to be noticed. Right? We all want to be heard. Social media has given us all a voice, and there's just something in human nature. It's not even a wrong thing. We just want someone to pay attention to us. And so if I was this woman, and I came to Jesus, and I told him, my baby girl needs healing, and he didn't say a word, I would have left because I would be over him. Oh, I see how it is. You can't speak to me. You had time for the last few people who needed a healing. You had time for the last few people who needed your attention. Everybody's walking around saying, oh, you're so loving. No, I think you're so fake. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out and I'm going to write a blog post about you. Jesus, I'm going to give you a Google review. 1-star Google review for Jesus. I don't care. I'm out of here. But not this woman. All right, she stayed. She was desperate. Please, please, please heal my baby girl. She was absolutely persistent. She kept at it. She kept asking. And eventually the disciples got frustrated with her persistence. Then his disciples urged Jesus to send her away. Tell her to go away, they said. She is bothering us with all her begging. I love this. She's bothering us with all her begging. She's not begged the disciples for one thing. She's not said, Matthew, I want to talk to you. Peter, I need to talk. James, please give me. Thomas, I need attention. Isn't it funny how we twist things in life that aren't directed at us and we make them about us? And we get offended about things that we should never get offended about because we got 88 followers on Instagram and I'm a pretty big deal. The disciples say, tell her to go away. They should never have gotten involved because it wasn't about them, but they got involved anyways. The disciples represent the offense of the institution. It is embarrassing how we get offended by institutions. That was the worst customer service I ever got. Do not fly United Airlines. I am never flying again until they have a sale. Right? This food was cold. You are a 5-star fine dining establishment. I'm done with you, Chili's. I'm out. Never again. Right? You just go event after event, thing after thing. People do this all the time with the church. Sometimes the greatest offenses in environments like this are not from the teachings of Jesus. They're just from people who bear the name of Jesus. You'd be shocked how many people will never show up to environments like this because of something somebody said or did. And the truth is, you went through a tough time and someone should have called and they didn't call. And the truth is, you drifted away from a church that you had been a part of for many, many years, and nobody even reached out. It was like they didn't even realize you were gone. The truth is, somebody should have known this was a big day for you, and they should have acknowledged it, but they didn't remember. And they didn't reflect Jesus in their response. And I'm just going to ask you this, please. Don't ever project the nature of an individual onto the character of God. If somebody has hurt you, don't project that onto the character of God. I would say if someone you love and respect and admire and you think they're about as close to Jesus as anybody you've ever met, do not project the nature of that person onto the character of God. God is in a completely different category. And definitely don't project yourself onto God, because God's not just a little bit nicer than you and a little bit more loving and a little bit more caring. God is in a category all to himself. And so the disciples say, tell her to go away. If you left church for a season because somebody hurt you, maybe you're a guest today and this was a challenging thing for you to walk into. If you stopped believing because of something somebody said or did, if you've been hurt by a pastor like me, if you've been hurt by me, if you've been hurt by someone who bears the name of Jesus, they call themselves a Jesus follower, I want you to know I am so sorry. But do not project the nature of an individual onto the character of God. Now, if I was this woman, I've been ignored by Jesus, and then I overheard the disciples saying, she's got to go, I would leave, but not her. She stays. And finally, because she stays, Jesus actually responds to her, and he says something very confusing. He said to the woman, I was sent only to help God's lost sheep, the people of Israel. So the first words this woman hears from Jesus is, girl, I'm not here for you. I've got my priority, and it's not you. It's the people of Israel. It's the Jewish people. To understand a little bit even of what Jesus is saying, you have to understand Jewish history, because for a couple thousand years, the way someone could be made right with God, maybe we would use the term, the way someone could be saved, was the same way it is today. They would put their faith in God, but then that faith was evidenced by following the customs and the rituals and the sacrifices of the Jewish law. So anybody who wasn't Jewish was seen as unclean. They were in bondage to their sin. Now, this is interesting. If they weren't Jewish and they wanted to be made right with God, they actually could, but in essence, they would have to become Jewish. They'd put their faith in God and then follow the Jewish rituals and customs and sacrifices. And so it's obvious this woman is struggling to follow God, and so Jesus is challenging her, and he's saying to her, hey, I've primarily come for the Jewish people. And again, this is so hard to understand, because eventually his message became for all people everywhere, but in this moment, he's kind of letting her know his priority. And so this is the offense of insignificance. Oh, so you're saying I don't matter? You're saying that you don't care about me because I'm not Jewish? And the reason it is so easy to get offended in life is we look at everything through the lens of our background and our demographic and our education and our experiences and our personality. So I walk in, I think you're being a jerk and you're ignoring me. But through your lens, you're saying, Dave looks like he's been busy lately. I'm just going to give him a little bit of space and give him some peace and quiet. I'm not going to interrupt him. However we see things in life, we are convinced that our vantage point validates us. We are convinced that we are the ones who see the full truth, and so we have the ability to speak full truth. But there are only 3 things in life that always tell the full truth: spandex, children, and drunk people. There it is. So sometimes the most important thing that we can do is pray for clarity and say, God, I don't have the whole picture. I need wisdom. I need insight. Help me to see where I'm wrong. Help me to see my blind spots. But God, I need clarity. And so Jesus says, I'm focused on the Jewish people. They take precedence. They take priority. And just because they take priority doesn't mean this woman is insignificant. All right? So this is equivalent to one of you hurting your ankle today, and we got to rush you to the hospital for them to look at your ankle. And so we get you in there, and somebody starts giving you a little bit of attention, and they're kind of trying to figure out if your ankle's broken. And at that very moment, a gunshot victim comes into the room. And so the gunshot victim comes into the room. What are they going to do? They push you aside. They kind of throw you an ice pack and say, put that on there. We'll get to you. And it'd be, how ridiculous would it be? How crazy would it be if you were like, oh, you're just going to take care of him? You don't care about me? No, see, that's why I don't like this hospital. I should have kept with the reviews before I even came here. You don't love me. You just take your bag of ice. I'm out of here. I'm going to go find another hospital. The fact Jesus is engaging a non-Jew in a conversation is his way of saying, you're important, you matter, you are significant. So he's not saying she's insignificant, but in a narcissistic, individualistic, selfie-saturated society, if I don't take precedence, I feel insignificant. If someone doesn't acknowledge me, if someone doesn't pay attention to me, if someone doesn't invite me, I feel insignificant. So by now, most of us would be gone, right? But not this woman. She decided, I'm not going to get stuck in my hurt right now. I need help. So she turns it up a notch. And she gets down on her knees. Even after the offense, she changes her posture. But she came and worshiped Jesus, pleading again, Lord, help me. This is so powerful. Offended multiple times, and she just keeps at it. Then Jesus, loving Jesus, compassionate Jesus, peaceful Jesus, merciful Jesus, looks at this woman crying out for her daughter to be healed, and we read this. Jesus responded, it isn't right to take food from the children and throw it to the dogs. Now, if that didn't make your sphincter tighten up just a few notches, you did not hear me. I mean, this sounds like bigotry and racism and arrogance and intolerance and prejudice and hatred and narrow-mindedness all kind of crammed together. And these are the things we've seen Jesus oppose over and over and over in his life. Now, I mentioned this earlier, but first century Jews would refer to non-Jews as dogs. And whether or not Jesus was using the term kind of in reference to the situation or he was actually calling this woman a dog, we don't know. I mean, that could be debated forever. But what we do know is Jesus was saying, it is not right for me to take God's covenant and the promises he's made to the Jewish people and give it to someone who's a non-Jew. But you can put your faith in God and decide to follow the Jewish customs and rituals. If you want to get close to God like the Jews, you have to leave behind your life and your ways and your way of doing things, and you need to surrender to God. You need to put your faith in him. This is pretty offensive. It's the offense of being insulted. Jesus says you've got to change. You've got to be a different person. I know we've all been insulted by people. I helped them move, but now they're too busy to help me move, even though they had a 9-month notice. Right? I gave them a good recommendation. I was willing to be a reference, but they say, I don't feel comfortable. I found out that I thought we were friends, but they're talking about me behind my back. We've all been insulted and hurt. Maybe you've felt insulted by God through your circumstance. Right? Because people used to call you all the time for marriage advice because you had the role model marriage. And then your marriage fell apart. Or people would call you because you just seemed like the best parent ever and you just had so much fun with your kids, but now your kids are messed up in different ways and it just feels like your situation is insulting you. You're offended by your circumstance. It's time to give up. This woman's been ignored by Jesus, rejected by the disciples, made to feel insignificant, and now she's being insulted. But it did not stop her. She did not get stuck. She replied, that's true, Lord, but even dogs are allowed to eat the scraps that fall beneath their master's table. There's humility. There's brokenness. She doesn't argue with this term. She understands how it's being used in this culture. She doesn't let the offense get to her. I'm convinced that sometimes all God's looking for in our hearts is a little bit of humility. And so Jesus, who we're trying to figure out, is he cold? Is he distant? Where is he at? He responds. Dear woman, Jesus said to her, your faith is great, your request is granted. and her daughter was instantly healed. If you want healing in your life, if you want to get unstuck from the hurt and pain, you have to find a way to get over your offenses. I know it's not easy, but don't give up. God is not Amazon Prime. It's not happening in 24 hours. If you want freedom in your life, you've got to be relentless. You can't get hung up on every offense that comes your way. And it is a slow journey, which is why the big idea of the series, life change, requires a long obedience in the same direction. That means daily deciding to not let the offenses, which are inevitable, become something you carry around with you. And here's the deal. If you can go through life and deal with offenses in a healthy way and make the choice to not be offended, you will get stronger. I don't know if you realize this, but about 40% of the birds in New Zealand are flightless. The kiwi, the penguin, parrots, on and on. They can't fly. And the reason they can't fly is because for centuries and centuries and centuries and centuries, there have been no predators on the island of New Zealand. So they don't have snakes, they don't have wolves, they don't have bobcats, they don't have things that would eat the birds. And so if there are no predators, there's no need for these birds to fly. And if there's no need to fly, eventually you will lose your ability to fly. And so if you go to New Zealand, you'll see birds walking around with these small wings because for generations and generations, nothing's opposed them and given them a reason to fly. If you never learn to stand up against an offense, you will never become strong. You'll never achieve your full potential if you get offended by everything that can possibly offend you. And so let's go back to this pain chart. I'm talking to you if you experience throughout the year, which we all do, discomforting, distressing, or intense pain or hurt. And if you want to get unstuck from it, I'm going to end with these 3 questions, and we're going to go through them very quickly. Number 1, I want you to ask yourself, am I choosing to be offended? Because often people say or do things they don't even mean, but we just read so much into them, and so we carry an offense that should never have been an offense in the first place. We've got to learn to give people the benefit of the doubt. Question number 2, am I taking myself too seriously? Sometimes we make ourselves the center of the universe without even thinking about it. We confuse precedence or priority with significance, and because we weren't made the priority, we feel insignificant, and so now we're carrying around this offense. We just take ourselves too seriously. Question number 3, have I been holding on to the offense for too long? Because there's some offenses you should have been offended. Should have been hurt. There should be pain. It's been a few years. And I don't have every step 1, 2, 3, A, B, C to make it all right. But maybe you just in your mind, your heart say, every time that I have an opportunity to act on that offense and that pain, I'm just going to say, I'm not going to act on it. I'm not going to let it dictate my day. Next week, we're going to continue this series, and we're going to talk about how to get unstuck in our relationships, specifically dating, married relationships, long-term relationships, partnerships. We're going to talk about that next week, and so I want to encourage you to be here, but I'm telling you that because if you know someone who's stuck in a very difficult place in their relationship, next week would be a great week to invite them. And if you're married, it'd be a great week to be here dating. If you say, someday I want to be dating, I'm on Tinder, I shouldn't have used that as my example, but all the other... Next week's your week to be here. Heavenly Father, give us the wisdom to know what to do with what we just heard and the courage to do it. In Jesus' name, amen.